The air, in the last drop, tasted like stale hops, unwashed desperation, and the faint metallic tang of an ancient grease trap. It was the kind of establishment that absorbed light and ambition, leaving only shadows and cheap neon buzzing above the scarred laminate bar. Every surface was sticky, carrying the residue of 1,000 drunken confessions and forgotten dreams. It was precisely Wotuwan hours. Sergeant Montgomery, though currently stripped of the rank and identification markers that defined her existence, sat rigid on a worn vinyl stool, nursing a glass of water with a wedge of lime. She wore a heavy, dark, grey hooded sweatshirt that had seen too many field rotations and a pair of faded tactical jeans. Her posture, even relaxed, was a monument to coiled tension. Shoulders back, spine perfectly straight, eyes scanning the exits, the bar mirror, and the three men attempting to play pool without falling over. The music, an aggressively loud, distorted rendition of a classic rock track, vibrated through the floorboards and up her spine. She could feel the thump, thump, thump in the hollows of her chest, a dull, physical echo of the adrenaline she tried, perpetually, to keep caged. Montgomery preferred this bar for its anonymity and its proximity to the sprawling, hidden complexity of the base perimeter. Most of the clientele were low-level grunts blowing off steam, or local townies who knew enough to keep their mouths shut and their eyes down. It was a place where she could observe, not interact. But tonight anonymity was proving elusive. A man the size of a tractor tire, clad in a cheaply laundered embroidered polo shirt, stretching taut across his expansive gut, had been tracking her since she walked in. His name, if the slurred introduction to the bartender earlier was accurate, was Davis. His eyes were bloodshot, glazed with cheap whiskey and aggressive self-importance. Davis wasn't active duty, not anymore, but he carried the swagger of a man who thought his past service entitled him to dominion over the present. He was loud, clumsy, and radiating the sort of corrosive entitlement that Montgomery had learned to neutralize in environments far more dangerous than this. He stomped over to her section of the bar, ignoring the small personal space buffer she had meticulously maintained. The scent of stale beer and cheap cologne, a lethal mix, washed over her. "Well, looky here," Davis bellowed, his voice straining to cut through the distorted guitar solo. He slammed a heavy fist onto the bar top next of her glass, making the ice cubes jump and clink. "A little girl drinking water in a place like this. What, you training for a triathlon, sweetheart?" Montgomery did not flinch. Her eyelids didn't even drop. She finished the water, placing the glass down with deliberate precision, ensuring the base didn't make a sound against the wet mahogany. "I am hydrating," she stated, her voice low, measured, and stripped of all inflection. Davis laughed, a wet hacking sound that seemed to come from the deepest reaches of his lungs. He leaned in, invading her space further. She could feel the heat radiating off his body, the oppressive, messy energy. "Hydrating, that's precious. Look, I'm just trying to make conversation. You're sitting here all intense, like you're waiting for a signal flare or something. Loosen up. Buy a man a shot, huh?" He punctuated the request by jabbing a thick, stubby finger towards her. Montgomery shifted slightly, an almost imperceptible adjustment of her core, preparing her center of gravity for kinetic response. "Negative," she said. "I'm observing." "Observing what?" "The dust bunnies behind the beer taps." Davis's face hardened, the artificial jocularity slipping away, revealing the mean-spirited frustration underneath. His ego felt threatened by her complete lack of interest. "Look, I know what you are. A pog trying to look tough in a hoodie. You probably worked the desk at Supply, right? Now you're trying to look like a goddamn operator in a dive bar." Montgomery's eyes, the color of storm-gray slate, finally locked onto his. The look was not angry. It was clinical. It was the way a surgeon looks at a cancerous growth, something that needs to be cleanly excised. "You misunderstand my classification," she replied. "Oh, I understand it fine," Davis scoffed, taking a belligerent gulp of his drink. He tilted his head, noticing the way her hoodie collar rested awkwardly high on her neck, It concealed something. He reached out a heavy, drunken hand and grasped the collar of her sweatshirt, intending to pull it down slightly, perhaps to expose a cheap chain or a generic name tape. Let's see what deep wisdom you're hiding under that field gear, huh? Montgomery's body moved first. It wasn't a visible strike or block. It was a micro-adjustment of her trapezius muscles and a slight, defensive rotation of her spine. Her right hand, still resting near the glass, tensed. Davis, fueled by alcohol and rage, didn't stop at the collar. He grabbed the front of the worn gray sweatshirt, intending to rip it open, to humiliate her, to expose the soft, desk-bound body he was convinced lay beneath. Rip! The old, worn cotton, already weakened by hundreds of high-temperature washes and jungle humidity, gave way instantly. The sound was sharp, shocking in the sudden acoustic dip of the bar, slicing through the bass of the music. The front of the sweatshirt tore from the neck down to the sternum, but that wasn't what silenced the bar. The tearing fabric exposed not a delicate supply clerk torso, but a lattice of corded muscle, flat and defined, honed by years of carrying obscene amounts of weight up mountains at a run. The skin was pale, accustomed to tactical darkness, but marked by a profound black scar that ran from the base of her throat, across her clavicle, and down towards her shoulder blade. More importantly, it exposed the extreme upper curve of the tattoo. It was just ink, a thick, black, stylized curve of linework that appeared, to the untrained eye, to be an incomplete, confusing, and vaguely aggressive drawing. Davis froze, his hand still clutching the torn fabric. He stared at the partial ink. The thick, drunken bravado returned instantly, morphing into loud derision. "Oh, wow," Davis slurred, stepping back, holding up the torn cloth like a trophy. "Look at this tough girl. Got a jailhouse scratch on her back. What is that, huh? A broken wing? Did your buddy try to draw a dragon and run out of ink? That's gotta be the ugliest piece of crap I've ever seen." A few patrons around the pool table snickered nervously. The music seemed to have lowered, though Montgomery knew it hadn't. The world outside the immediate sphere of tension had become muffled. Montgomery did not move to cover herself. The shredded fabric hung in tatters. She just stood there, letting the cold air of the bar kiss the skin of her exposed chest and shoulder. Slowly, deliberately, she began to move her arms. Not violently, but with the fluid, heavy grace of someone performing a critical, practiced maneuver. She grasped the remaining shreds of the heavy sweatshirt. Davis, still chuckling at his own superior wit, reached for her again, intending to poke the ugly scratch. "Maybe you should get a refund, sweetie. That thing looks like..." Tear. Montgomery ripped the remaining fabric from her body. The heavy, dark gray cloth separated completely, hitting the sticky floor with a soft, final thud. She was now wearing a simple, dark green tactical tank top beneath. Standard issue moisture-wicking gear, nothing more. But the complete removal of the sweatshirt revealed the full expanse of the image, the reason for the partial dark curve that Davis had so carelessly mocked. Montgomery turned her back slightly to the bar, pivoting just enough to bring the entire canvas into the direct, unforgiving glare of a flickering neon Budweiser sign hanging above the counter. The entire pub went silent. The sound of the pool balls clicking died. Even the relentless thump-thump-thump of the bass seemed to hesitate. Sprawled across the landscape of her back, consuming the skin from her left trapezius down to the lumbar region and across the breadth of her shoulder blades, was the insignia. It wasn't a scratch. It wasn't a broken wing. It was a masterpiece of black and gray wash, rendered in forensic detail, radiating cold, terrifying competence. It was the ghost hawk. The central image was a massive, stylized bird of prey, an osprey crossed with an eagle, but rendered with skeletal, mechanical precision. Its talons gripped a massive, double-bladed scythe, its curved edges honed so finely they seemed to reflect the dim bar light even where no light existed. The eyes of the bird were twin black holes, piercing, eternal, and beneath the talons where the bird's prey should have been, were three perfect five-pointed stars, aligned in a specific inverted delta formation. The ink was specialized, almost iridescent in its depth, and seemed to move with the subtle flex of her muscles. Davis, who had been mid-sentence, saw the symbol and stopped breathing. The blood drained instantly from his face, leaving his cheeks the color of stale plaster. He wasn't looking at a tattoo anymore. He was looking at a flag. The symbol was not public knowledge. It was not in the official registry. It was a code, a whispered designation, an assurance of lethal efficacy for those who mattered, and a promise of swift oblivion for those who stood in the way. Davis, despite his drunken ignorance, had served long enough to understand the gravity of certain symbols, even if he couldn't name this one. He saw the cold, brutal professionalism of the artwork, the scars that intersected the image, scars that looked more like intentional framing than injury, and the complete, profound stillness of the woman wearing it. The silence grew heavier, thicker than the stagnant air. As Montgomery stood there, her gaze fixed distantly toward the beer taps, the image on her back seemed to activate, drawing her mind into the crucible where that mark was forged. The bar faded, the smell of beer evaporated, replaced by the crushing cold and the smell of high-altitude grit. The transition was instantaneous and overwhelming. One moment, the oppressive humidity of the last drop. The next, the rarefied knife-edge cold of the Hindu Kush Range, 14,000 feet above sea level. It was January 2018. She was not Montgomery then. She was designated Spectre. The mission profile was simple, brutal, and had a 0% extraction guarantee. Locate and retrieve Dr. Elias Vance, the high-value asset known as Oracle, who had been captured by a sophisticated networked insurgent cell in a region so remote it wasn't even marked on most tactical maps. The team was 4 strong, designated Task Force 77, the Shadow Reapers. There was Jinx, explosives and comms, Spartan, heavy weapons and point, Viper, infiltration and medic, and Spectre, command and close-quarters annihilation. They had been inserted by high-altitude, low-opening, Halo parachute drop at 300 hours, 2 days prior. The air was so thin, it felt like breathing sand. Every inhalation was a physical chore. Montgomery remembered the sensation of hitting the frozen ground. The silence was absolute, insulating, broken only by the sharp shush of snow settling on their gear and the frantic rhythmic pumping of her own blood in her ears. Her pack weighed 110 pounds, standard loadout for a 4-day solo operation with minimal resupply capacity. It was an obscene weight designed to test the limits of human endurance. Montgomery didn't just carry it, she wore it, incorporating the bulk into her balance and movement. They moved for 36 hours straight, traversing sheer ice faces and hidden crevasses. The training kicked in, the deliberate 3-second step cycles, the regulated breathing. The focus narrowed down to the boot in front of her. She could still feel the burn in her quadriceps, the deep, pervasive ache in her lower back, a foundational physical pain that was the bedrock of elite survival. Jinx, normally the most talkative, communicated only in sharp, necessary whispers into the comms. Spectre, wind speed increasing, velocity 35 knots, visibility dropping. Acknowledge, maintain pace. Spartan, lead point 5 degrees west. The thermal signature we registered suggests a cave complex approximately 800 meters ahead. Spartan, a mountain of quiet muscle, moved with the unnerving silence of a ghost, his suppressed HK-416 scanning the white horizon. He had earned his call sign by once running an entire marathon in full combat gear just to win a bet. They reached the crest overlooking the valley. Below them, nestled against the black rock, was a cluster of stone and mud buildings, the village, and the thermal telltales confirmed human presence, sophisticated heating, and critically, a large concentration of encrypted radio chatter. Oracle was there. "We go Ghost Hawk protocol," Montgomery whispered, watching the snow swirl into miniature hurricanes. Silent insertion. Viper, set up on the North Ridge, Overwatch. Jinx, prep breaching charges for the main compound entrance, eastern face. Spartan and I are going in through the ventilation shaft. The infiltration was textbook. Every movement was pre-programmed, refined over thousands of hours in simulated hell. They were shadows moving through shadows. The cold was their accomplice. They reached the compound wall. Spartan used a specialized thermal cutter, the sound swallowed by the howling wind. A perfect 3-foot square opening appeared in the wall. Montgomery slipped through first. The air inside was warm, fetid, thick with the smell of diesel heating and unwashed bodies. They were inside the hive. They navigated the narrow, winding corridors, counting steps, identifying exit paths, calculating angles of fire. They found Oracle secured in a heavy steel room, guarded by 2 men playing cards. The first contact. Montgomery raised her suppressed pistol. 2 quiet pops. 2 men dropped instantly, clean cranial shots. No sound, no alarm. Spartan secured Oracle, a gaunt, terrified man clutching a satellite phone. "Extraction in 10 minutes, Oracle," Montgomery hissed. "Move!" But the silence was broken too soon. They were spotted by a roving patrol exiting the eastern armory. "Contact! Contact! Room 4! Fucking—" The corridor erupted. Montgomery slammed Spartan and Oracle to the ground, pulling her rifle into the ready position. The 5.56 rounds tore through the cinder block, showering them in dust and grit. "Jinx, abort breach, cover fire. Viper, suppress those windows now." The return fire was immediate and heavy. They were pinned down. "Spectre, we are compromised." Jinx's voice, tight with strain, crackled over the comms. "They're flanking. Northern approach. 3 men with RPKs. Take the flank, Jinx. Spartan, we're advancing to the main courtyard. Viper, focus fire on the high windows." They fought their way out of the bunker, Spartan shielding Oracle with his body. The courtyard was a killing zone, floodlights snapping on, illuminating the swirling snow and the sudden storm of tracers. Montgomery moved in the center of the chaos, her actions hyper-focused. She saw the muzzle flashes, anticipated the trajectories, and corrected her aim fractions of a second before her opponents did. She wasn't fighting. She was executing a complex, lethal dance. It was in the courtyard that everything went wrong. Jinx, covering their 6, shouted a final fractured warning. "IED, west wall!" The explosion was deafening. Not the clean, controlled detonation of their C4, but the terrifying, ragged roar of a massive improvised explosive device buried deep and triggered by pressure plate. The force threw Montgomery 30 feet, slamming her against a frozen pile of firewood. The world dissolved into a ringing blackness, filled with the smell of burning copper and pulverized concrete. When the ringing receded, the cold returned, overwhelming and absolute. She pushed herself up, her ears bleeding, her vision swimming. The courtyard was unrecognizable. Where the west wall had stood, there was now a smoking crater. Spartan was lying, face down, motionless, his heavy pack ripped open. Oracle was gone, and Jinx had taken the blast head on. There was nothing left but fragmented memories and the stench of scorched fabric. Montgomery knelt beside Spartan. She rolled him gently. He was still breathing, shallow and rattling, but the shrapnel damage to his chest was catastrophic. "Spartan," she whispered, her voice hoarse, tasting of dust and blood. He opened his eyes, glassy and unfocused. He tried to speak, but only a bloody froth escaped his lips. He lifted his hand weakly, pointing towards the smoke-filled darkness where Oracle must have been thrown. "Go!" The look in his eyes screamed. "Finish the mission." Montgomery didn't have time for sorrow. Sorrow was a luxury, afforded only to the living. After the operation was complete, she ripped off her trauma plate and pressed it hard against Spartan's wound, giving him a few agonizing seconds of potential life. "Viper, report!" she screamed into the comms. Only static answered. Viper on the ridge was now alone, exposed, and almost certainly overrun by the rapidly mobilizing insurgents who had heard the explosion. She was alone. Spectre was the ghost hawk now. Her mind shifted into a state of chilling clarity, a heightened operational rhythm she called the Reaper Protocol. Survival was secondary, retrieval was primary. Annihilation of threat was necessary. She grabbed the remaining spare ammunition from Spartan's belt. 7.62 rounds. Not her preferred 5.56, but they would do. She checked her combat knife, its dark ceramic blade gleaming faintly. She moved into the smoke. The search for Oracle led her deeper into the complex, into tight subterranean tunnels dug beneath the compound. The enemy soldiers, thinking they had neutralized the threat, became sloppy, confident. Montgomery became the darkness itself. She stalked the tunnels, relying only on her sense of hearing and the faint residual warmth of the enemy bodies. She used the 7.62 rounds sparingly, preferring the knife. She dispatched the first patrol of 3 men in under 5 seconds, leaving their bodies stacked neatly, their throats slit with surgical efficiency, their weapons appropriated. The cold precision of the action was necessary. She detached herself from the outcome, focusing only on the input-output ratio. One threat neutralized, one step forward. She found Oracle jammed behind a steel barrel, shaking violently. He was alive, but incoherent. "We're moving, Oracle. Now!" The exfiltration was a nightmare carved from ice and shadow. They had lost their primary extraction point. Their comms were down, and the entire mountainside was now swarming with highly motivated hostiles, anticipating a clean kill. Montgomery carried the scientist like a child, slung over her back, while simultaneously wielding her rifle with deadly accuracy. She moved through the sheer darkness, scaling the ice wall they had descended hours before. She fought for 3 hours, a relentless, sustained battle of attrition against overwhelming numbers. She was hit twice, a glancing shot to her left forearm, the trajectory of which would later leave the large scar running across her shoulder blade, and a deep, agonizing grazing wound along her ribs, sustained during a desperate scramble across an open ice field. The pain was merely input. She suppressed it, using the endorphin surge as fuel. At the highest ridge, as dawn broke, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of cold blue and hostile orange, she finally found Viper. Viper was dead, draped over his sniper rifle. He had been shot 7 times, defending the ridgeline long after his ammunition ran out, his final act being the destruction of his communication gear to prevent its capture. Montgomery looked at the destruction. Jinx vaporized, Spartan bleeding out on the courtyard floor. Viper executed. She was the only one left. She carried their weight. She carried the mission. She pulled Viper's spare signal beacon, a highly encrypted device from his kit, and triggered it. It was a beacon that transmitted a highly specific 3-star burst pattern, the Ghost Hawk distress call. She looked down at the valley, now crawling with the enemy, and then up at the unforgiving sky. She had moved like a ghost through the enemy's ranks, harvesting lives with the cold indifference of the ultimate predator. She had become the Reaper. She finally sat down, slumping against a wind-whipped boulder, Oracle huddled beside her. She stared at the black rock, tracing the outline of her life. She was a weapon, forged in the heat of violence and tempered by the infinite cold of loss. When the heavy-lift stealth helicopter, codenamed Cerberus, finally arrived, descending through the swirling snow, she was still holding the high ground, her rifle steady, her eyes tracking every movement in the valley below. She delivered Oracle. She delivered the captured intelligence, and she delivered the remains of her team. Upon debriefing, she refused all traditional commendations. She requested only one thing, the specific unit designation insignia to be rendered permanently onto her skin, covering the scars she had earned while carrying the mission to completion. The Ghost Hawk, clutching the scythe, marked by the 3 stars of the fallen members of Task Force 77. The ink was not merely a memory. It was the final receipt of payment for a debt of honor. The memory receded violently, snapping Montgomery back into the reality of the loud, sticky bar. The silence was still total. She felt the residual phantom chill of the Afghan winter on her exposed skin. She felt the heavy, dead weight of the 100-pound pack. She felt the ghost of Spartan's blood drying on her hands. But she was here. She was whole, and the tattoo was burning under the neon light. Davis, the antagonist, was still standing 3 feet away, paralyzed. His initial drunken mockery had evaporated, replaced by a cold, seismic shock. He wasn't seeing a jailhouse scratch anymore. He was looking at a covenant written in blood. He had spent years posturing, throwing around the language of war in safe environments. Now, he was face to face with someone who embodied the savage, clean reality of it. His eyes darted across the details of the ink, the triple star formation, the stylized scythe blade, rendered in such specific detail that it seemed to vibrate. The ghost hawk itself, whose talons looked like they could tear steel. Davis was shaking. He had recognized the quality of the wearer, even if he didn't know the unit name. That wasn't just ink, it was military-grade trauma mapping. Every line was paid for in pain and sacrifice. He tried to speak. His throat was dry, constricted. I didn't know, he managed to rasp, the words failing to form a proper apology. His hands, which moments before had been aggressive and grabbing, were now hanging uselessly at his sides. Montgomery rotated slightly, her movement slow, controlled, and intensely focused on him. She looked over her shoulder, her eyes finding his in the dim light. Her expression was neutral, but her intensity felt like a physical pressure, pressing the air from his lungs. "You didn't know what, Instructor Davis?" she asked, using the assumed title he had been throwing around earlier. He flinched visibly at the recognition of his name. I didn't know you were a serious operator. I thought you were just a civvy, some kid. You shouldn't assume," Montgomery said, her voice remaining low, the perfect counterpoint to the silence of the bar. The bartender, a burly, weathered man named Frank, who had seen more than his share of drunken brawls, slowly reached under the counter, not for a shotgun, but for a clean bar towel. He knew this was not a fight he wanted to interrupt. But then, the final, crucial element of the scene shifted. Near the shadowed corner booth, where 3 men in civilian suits had been quietly observing the proceedings, one of them stood up. This man was not merely large, he was imposing. His suit, though perfectly tailored, could not conceal the granite structure of his frame. His hair was cropped short, showing silver at the temples, and his face was a roadmap of command authority, etched with the deep lines of sleepless nights spent analyzing maps and signing death orders. This was Colonel Elias Thorne, currently serving in Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, and critically, one of the 3 men in the entire theater of operations with the highest level clearance for Shadow Force assets. He was off duty, meeting informants, trying to blend in. He hadn't been paying much attention to the common bar fight until the sudden, profound silence, followed by the revelation of the massive, unique artwork on the woman's back. Thorne took a single, slow step out of the shadows. His gaze was fixed, laser-like on the symbol. He saw the ghost hawk, he saw the scythe, and his eyes landed immediately on the inverted delta formation of the 3 stars. Thorne went rigid, every muscle in his body locked. This symbol was restricted. It was classified. It did not exist in any public-facing record. It was the mark of Task Force 77, the Reapers, a unit that, according to official doctrine, had been entirely disbanded, its personnel scattered or listed as KIA for security purposes after the Tora Bora extraction. The fact that one of them was standing here, breathing, in a dive bar, wearing that lineage on her back, was a massive security breach. But more than that, it was the site of a legend. Thorne recognized the specific artist's signature on the ink, a specialized tattoo artist who worked exclusively in a black site clinic near Stuttgart, used only by this specific command structure. His breathing hitched. He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly as he registered the scar tissue running through the design. He knew that specific mission, Chimera's Veil. He had read the after-action report, the most secure document in the command's history. The report that claimed 3 KIA and 1 Spectre presumed detached, mission complete. Montgomery's Spectre had not only completed the mission, she had carried the dead, survived a massive IED, and fought alone for hours against a coordinated force. She was, quite literally, the last surviving member of a designated extinct unit. Thorne saw the bloodied reality of her commitment staring back at him from her skin. Davis, still hyperventilating, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, turned his head toward the silent newcomer. "Hey, Suit, what are you looking at? You got a problem too?" Davis tried to recover his bravado, but the words were weak, reedy. Thorne did not even acknowledge Davis. His eyes remained locked on Montgomery's back, tracking the lines of the ink. Thorne was not just an officer. He was a gatekeeper of the deepest secrets of military power. He understood the code. This young woman, standing exposed in a ripped shirt, was not just an elite soldier. She was an asset of immeasurable value, a walking, breathing, lethal piece of history. If she was here, there was a reason. If she was compromised, the consequences were devastating. A cold, professional panic seized Thorne. He felt the sweat prickling on his scalp. He had to handle this, now, without drawing further attention. He had to show deference that bypassed all traditional military protocol. He moved toward Montgomery, bypassing Davis entirely. Davis tried to intercept him, reaching out a hand. "Don't touch me," Thorne stated, his voice a low, grinding rumble of absolute authority that instantly silenced Davis. Thorne stopped directly behind Montgomery. He was close enough now to smell the faint traces of gunpowder and cleaning solvent that clung permanently to her skin beneath the cheap bar odors. He stared at the ghost hawk. He saw the life it had cost. He lifted his right hand. Slowly, deliberately, in the most profound gesture of respect and panic a commissioned officer can give to an enlisted warrior, Colonel Elias Thorne, JSOC, executed a sharp, perfect military salute. It was instantaneous, sharp, and carried the weight of 1,000 yards of brass and ribbons. In the civilian, sticky, loud chaos of the last drop, the sight of a man in an expensive suit snapping to attention like a fresh recruit was unnerving. The silence intensified. Even Frank, the bartender, paused his movement, the towel frozen mid-air. Davis watched the colonel salute. He watched the man who radiated silent power give the ultimate respect to the woman he had just insulted. Davis felt his knees give way. He staggered backwards, stumbling over a bar stool, the realization hitting him with the force of an artillery shell. He hadn't been mocking a tough girl with a bad tattoo. He'd been disrespecting a living, breathing legend, an off-book, untouchable war machine. And he had done it in front of a high-ranking officer who clearly understood the gravity of the situation. Montgomery felt the shift in air pressure behind her. She did not need to turn to know who was there. She knew the weight of that presence, the specific energy signature of high-level command recognition. She remained motionless, staring forward. Thorne held the salute, his arm rigid, his expression fixed on the back of her head, the image on her back serving as the flag he honored. "Sergeant Montgomery," Thorne stated, his voice barely audible, raw with respect and urgency. He used her actual name, not her call sign, acknowledging her return to the world of the living. "At ease, Colonel," Montgomery replied, her voice remaining perfectly steady, perfectly neutral, the way she had trained herself to speak during hostage negotiations. She was acknowledging his rank, but asserting her current status, outside the chain of command, protected by her mission success. Thorne slowly lowered his hand, his eyes scanning the room, assessing the compromised environment. He spoke in a low, rushed whisper, addressing the exposed back and the terrifying insignia. "Spectre, we didn't know you were stateside." The operational profile suggested extended leave. Montgomery slowly turned, facing Thorne. Her eyes were still storm gray, but now held a flickering light of recognition. She knew Thorne, or at least his profile. "Leave is terminated, Colonel. The environment is becoming unstable." "Clearly," Thorne muttered, nodding toward the petrified Davis, who was now crawling away on the floor, trying desperately to blend into the shadows. "We need to talk, now, not here," Thorne commanded, though his tone was layered with a deep, profound respect. He had just confirmed that the ultimate shadow asset was back in play, and she had just confirmed that she perceived a threat environment. Montgomery glanced down at the remains of her ripped shirt on the floor. "Extraction protocol is required, Colonel. I am exposed." Thorne nodded once, sharply, taking in the full visual of the ghost hawk on her back, understanding the lethal threat she represented and the necessity of keeping that image classified. "Frank!" Thorne barked, his voice regaining its command resonance. "Bar closed! Everyone out, now!" Frank, recognizing the look of pure, unadulterated military urgency, grabbed a softball bat from beneath the counter and started gesturing frantically towards the exits. The remaining patrons, sensing that this quiet, tense interaction was infinitely more dangerous than the typical drunken scuffle, scrambled for the door. They had seen enough. They had seen a general salute a woman in a shredded tank top who had an unholy image of death tattooed on her back. As the last civilian stumbled out, Thorne pulled out a secure satellite phone, dialing a single encrypted number. "This is Eagle 1. Code red status. I have Spectre. Require immediate silent transport. Class Delta to command bunker. Bring full operational dossier. Hard copy." "And Colonel?" Thorne paused, his gaze sweeping over Montgomery's tattoo one last time. "Prepare the resources. The Reaper is active." Montgomery stood in the center of the now empty, silent bar, the neon sign casting a bloody red glow across the Ghost Hawk insignia. She reached down, picked up the shredded remnants of her sweatshirt, and walked toward the exit, preparing for the next mission. The leave was over. The hunt had begun. The bar fight was merely the first casualty.